If this story interested you, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and tell us which city you're watching us from. We continue. The plane landed at Heathrow around 7 in the evening, and Robert Alden felt the weight of 5 months of accumulated exhaustion settle on his shoulders, like a physical burden that seemed to multiply with each passing second. 5 months, 150 days, more than 3,600 hours away from home, away from Isabella. Robert looked out the plane window before getting up, seeing the lights of London stretching as far as the eye could see, an infinite carpet of luminous dots that twinkled like fallen stars on the concrete. The city he had helped build, literally, with his developments spread across dozens of boroughs. Commercial buildings, residential complexes, shopping centres. The Alden Empire was one of the most solid in the British real estate market, with projects in 12 counties, and now, finally, expanding into the international market. But at that moment, looking at that immensity of concrete and lights, Robert felt only a deep and growing emptiness. What good was building an empire if he couldn't be present in the life of the only person who truly mattered? He took his carry-on bag from the overhead compartment, thanked the flight attendant with a discreet nod, and followed the other passengers down the jet bridge. The first class on the flight from Frankfurt had been comfortable, with its lie-flat seats and impeccable service, but no airplane seat could replace his own bed. More than that, no place in the world could replace his daughter's hug. His driver was waiting for him at arrivals, holding a sign with his name even though it was completely unnecessary. After nearly 10 years of loyal service, Charles was more than just a driver. He was a silent confidant, someone who had known the Alden family since Isabella was just a baby wrapped in pink blankets. "Good evening, Dr. Alden," Charles said, immediately taking the suitcase. "How was the trip?" "Too long, Charles. Far too long." The two walked in silence through the arrivals terminal, passing by reuniting families, emotional hugs, children running into their parents' arms. Robert felt a pang of pain in his chest. Was Isabella waiting for him? Would Patricia have told her he was arriving today? Over the past few months, communication with home had been strangely difficult, as if an invisible barrier stood between him and his own family. The car park was crowded as usual, and the warm August air enveloped them as soon as they stepped out of the terminal's air conditioning. London in summer was a mix of humid heat and pollution that clung to the skin. Robert got into the car, a black Mercedes S-Class with tinted windows, and finally allowed his body to relax a little against the soft leather of the back seat. "Straight home, Charles." "Please." The car pulled out of the car park and joined the chaotic traffic of the M4 motorway. Robert pulled his phone from his pocket, thinking of calling home, but hesitated. He wanted to see the expression on Isabella's face when he appeared as a surprise. He wanted to see her run to him, throw herself into his arms as she always did after his trips. Even if he was only away for 2 or 3 days, Isabella always greeted him as if he had been absent for years. He thought of Isabella, 7 years old, brown hair that shone golden in the sun, always tied in elaborate braids that Marina used to make with such patience and love. Marina. The thought of his deceased wife still hurt, even after 3 years. She had left so suddenly, so unexpectedly, leaving an immense void that no amount of work could completely fill. A cerebral aneurysm. That's what the doctors said. A silent rupture that took her in a matter of hours, without warning, without goodbyes, without last words. Isabella was only 4 when she lost her mother. She was too young to fully understand what that permanent absence meant. Robert remembered how his daughter would wait for Marina to come back, how she would run to the door every time she heard footsteps in the hallway, believing her mother had finally returned from her trip. It took months for Isabella to start accepting that Marina wouldn't return. And even now, 3 years later, Robert sometimes caught her looking at old photos, her little eyes glistening with unshed tears. That's why he married Patricia. At least, that's what he told himself on nights when guilt wouldn't let him sleep. Isabella needed a maternal figure. She needed stability, someone who would be present when he had to travel, and Patricia seemed perfect for that. He had met her at a charity event for the London Business Association about 18 months after Marina passed away. Patricia Montgomery was everything London society expected to see beside a successful businessman like him. Blonde, tall, elegant, always impeccably dressed in imported designer clothes. She moved with ease among the city's business and cultural elite, spoke 3 languages fluently, had a postgraduate degree in fine arts from the Sorbonne. She was sophisticated, intelligent, and demonstrated, or at least Robert believed she demonstrated, genuine interest in Isabella. Their courtship was brief, almost rushed in retrospect. 6 months after they met, Robert proposed to Patricia. The wedding was discreet, only close family and a few intimate friends at an elegant ceremony at the Savoy. Patricia entered the Alden family's life like a whirlwind of sophistication and change. She redecorated the entire house, replaced furniture, hired new staff, established new routines. And that's when things began to change. At first, they were small details that Robert attributed to a natural adjustment period. Patricia suggested Isabella spend more time in her room doing homework. She said the girl needed to learn discipline, routine, responsibility. Robert, absorbed in his work and trusting his wife's judgment, agreed. Patricia also began to limit visits from Julia, Marina's sister. She said her sister-in-law was having difficulty accepting the new family dynamic, that her frequent visits were confusing Isabella and making it harder for the girl to adapt to the new reality. Robert again agreed. After all, Patricia was home every day. She knew better than he did what was happening, or at least that's what he chose to believe, because the alternative was to admit he was failing as a father by letting someone else make all decisions about his daughter's upbringing. Then came the international trips. Alden Developments was expanding into the European and Asian markets, ambitious projects that required Robert's personal presence in complex negotiations. The first trip was to Dubai, 2 weeks establishing partnerships with Middle Eastern investors. Then Frankfurt, a whole month finalizing contracts with German groups. Then Shanghai, where he stayed for almost 2 months developing a massive residential project in partnership with Chinese construction companies. Calls home during this period became increasingly frustrating. Patricia always answered, always with that sweet, controlled voice, always with an excuse for Isabella not to be able to speak. The girl was sleeping, even though it was late afternoon in London. She was at ballet class, at piano lessons, at the pediatrician's. She had a headache and couldn't be disturbed. She was having a difficult day and needed space. Robert accepted the explanations because the alternative was to face a truth he wasn't prepared to see. And because, deep down, a part of him felt relieved not to have to deal with the emotional demands of fatherhood while he was trying to build a business empire on the other side of the world. Attempts to speak with Julia had also been systematically blocked. Patricia had mentioned several times that her sister-in-law was being inconvenient, showing up at the house unannounced, asking inappropriate questions about how Isabella was being raised, questioning Patricia's decisions about the girl's diet, routine, and education. She had said that she needed to set firm boundaries, that Julia needed to understand once and for all that now she, Patricia, was the lady of the house and responsible for Isabella. Robert, tired of the endless trips and wanting to avoid family conflicts, had agreed that Patricia should set whatever boundaries she deemed necessary. He even called Julia in a moment of growing guilt, asking his sister-in-law to respect his new family's space. Julia tried to argue, tried to say that something was wrong, that Isabella didn't look well the few times she managed to see her, but Robert cut the conversation short, saying that Julia was having difficulty overcoming the loss of her sister and was projecting her insecurities onto the situation. Now, in the back seat of the car, driving across the A40 Westway towards Belgravia, Robert felt the overwhelming weight of each of those decisions. The guilt that had been slowly growing during the last months of travel was now a physical presence in his chest, tightening, suffocating. The traffic was heavy even for a Thursday evening, and it took them almost an hour to cover a journey that would normally take 20 minutes. Robert used the time to reply to some urgent emails on his phone, but his mind was elsewhere. It was at home in Isabella's room, imagining how his daughter might have grown in the last 5 months. Children changed so fast at that age. Had she grown taller, lost a tooth, learned new things at school? The last video call he had managed to have with Isabella had been almost 2 months ago. The connection was bad, the image constantly freezing, but even so, Robert had managed to see that something was different. Isabella seemed smaller somehow, quieter, less animated. When he asked how she was, the girl just said, "I'm fine, Daddy," in such a small voice it was almost inaudible. Patricia interrupted soon after, saying the connection was terrible and it was better to hang up to save mobile data. Robert didn't insist. He never did. And that was perhaps his greatest failure as a father. The car finally entered the gated community of Belgravia, one of London's most exclusive enclaves, where each house easily cost tens of millions of pounds. Automatic wrought-iron gates opened upon recognizing the car, revealing tree-lined streets with centuries-old trees, imposing mansions of diverse architectural styles, a mix of classic and modern that reflected the varied tastes of its billionaire residents. Private security guards patrolled discreetly, hidden cameras monitored every inch, a bubble of safety and privilege isolated from the rest of the chaotic city outside. The Alden family home was at the end of a cul-de-sac, strategically positioned for maximum privacy. It was a 3-story modernist construction, entirely of tempered glass and exposed concrete, designed by an award-winning architect and celebrated in specialized magazines. Huge windows allowed natural light to flood every room during the day, while at night the automated lighting system created an atmosphere that seemed straight out of a decor magazine. A ground-floor horizontal garden, a heated infinity pool, a private gym, a private cinema in the basement. A symbol of success that now, returning after so long, seemed to Robert merely a gilded cage. All the lights in the house were on, creating a warm glow that spilled through the immense windows. Robert thanked Charles with a nod, picked up his suitcase and walked to the front door. Before he could use his key, the door opened as if someone had been expecting his arrival. Patricia stood there, framed by the light of the entrance hall, looking as if she had just stepped out of a fashion magazine photo shoot. She wore a cream silk ensemble that probably cost more than many British families' monthly wages, her blonde hair falling in perfect waves over her tanned shoulders, impeccable makeup even on a regular Thursday evening. She smiled, that practiced and perfect smile Robert had learned to recognize as her standard expression for the world. "Darling, you're here," she said, leaning in to kiss him lightly on the cheek, a social kiss that conveyed no real affection. Was the trip good? Robert stepped inside, leaving his suitcase on the immense marble-floored hall. His eyes roamed the space, searching for signs of life, for Isabella. "Exhausting," he replied, his voice rougher than he intended. "Where is Isabella?" Patricia closed the door behind him, and Robert noticed how her smile faltered for just a fraction of a second before recomposing itself. "She's in her room, dear. Not feeling too well today. You must be tired from your journey. How about taking a shower and having dinner before going up? We wouldn't want to wake her if she's already asleep. You know how irritable children get when they're woken up." Something in Patricia's voice sounded artificial, and that something triggered a primitive alarm in Robert's brain. He had known her long enough to recognize when she was trying to control him, to direct him. And there was something else, something in her eyes, a brief flicker of what might have been panic or fear before the mask of perfection settled back into place. "I want to see her first," Robert said, his voice firm for the first time in months. 5 months is too long. I need to see my daughter now." He was already walking towards the stairs without waiting for a reply. Behind him, he heard Patricia start to speak, her words coming out rushed and in a higher tone than usual. "Robert, she really needs to rest. She had a very difficult day at school, and then ballet class was tiring and—" But Robert was already ascending the steps 2 at a time, driven by a growing urgency that he couldn't rationally explain, but that pulsed with every accelerated beat of his heart. The dark premonition that had been building throughout the entire journey home, all those interrupted calls, all those excuses, all those strange conversations, all of it was taking shape, materializing into something concrete and terrifying in the pit of his stomach. The second-floor hallway was long, with high ceilings and white walls decorated with contemporary artworks Patricia had collected. Robert walked past it all without seeing anything, his focus entirely concentrated on the door at the end of the hallway. Isabella's bedroom door. It was ajar, a narrow sliver of yellow light escaping into the dark corridor. Robert pushed the door open slowly, his heart hammering against his ribs, and what he saw on the other side made the world around him stop completely. Isabella was sitting on the edge of her pink canopy child's bed, her little feet dangling without reaching the wooden floor. She wore a light pink cotton dress decorated with embroidered flowers, a gift he had sent from Dubai months ago. But the dress that should have fit perfectly now hung too loosely on her bony shoulders, the fabric falling strangely on a tiny body that seemed to have shrunk, diminished, disappeared. The girl was looking at her own hands, turning them slowly as if they were strange objects she no longer recognized. When she heard the door open and lifted her eyes, Robert literally felt the floor disappear beneath his feet. Isabella's eyes, those lively brown eyes that shone with their own light, were sunken, deep-set in sockets that seemed too large for her small face. Dark, profound circles ringed her eyes, marks that shouldn't exist on a 7-year-old child's face. The cheeks, Robert remembered as full and rosy, always flushed red after running in the garden, were now hollow, her jawbone and cheekbones too prominently marked. The little arms emerging from the short sleeves of her dress were thin as twigs, so thin that Robert could see every contour of her bones, every joint, every tendon. Her skin had an unhealthy, almost translucent pallor, with small blemishes here and there that spoke of nutritional deficiencies. "Daddy," she whispered, and even her voice seemed different, fragile, as if coming from very far away, as if she were speaking from the bottom of a dark well. Robert crossed the room in 3 wide strides, his knees hitting the floor hard as he knelt before his daughter. "Isabella," he said, his hands trembling as he touched her. "My daughter, my little one. What happened to you?" He pulled her into his arms, and what he felt was like a punch to the stomach that knocked all the air from his lungs. Isabella's body was light, frighteningly light, as if she were made of papier-mâché, as if there was no real substance there. He could feel every rib through the thin fabric of her dress, every vertebra of her spine, every protruding bone where there shouldn't be protruding bones. The little hands that clung to him trembled slightly, and when Robert held one of them, he felt how icy it was, too cold, without the vibrant warmth that every healthy child should have. Patricia appeared at the bedroom door at that moment, and Robert saw on her face a complex mix of emotions that passed too quickly for him to fully decipher. Fear, perhaps, or anger, or a desperate attempt to maintain control of a situation that was slipping from her perfectly manicured hands. "Robert, you're overreacting," she said, and her smile returned to her face like a mask being put into place. "Isabella had a bad flu these past few weeks. She's just recovering, that's all. You know how thin children get when they're ill. It's completely normal." Robert turned to his wife, Isabella still clinging to him as if he were the only solid thing in a crumbling world. "This is not flu," he said, and his voice was trembling not from tiredness, but from anger, a cold, controlled rage that was beginning to burn within him. "Look at her, Patricia. Look at my daughter and tell me that this is normal." "She's fine, darling," Patricia retorted, but her voice was starting to get louder, more defensive. "You're tired from your trip. You're seeing things that aren't there. Tomorrow she'll be better, you'll see. You'll wake up, realize you were being dramatic, and everything will be fine." But Robert couldn't tear his eyes away from Isabella. The girl was huddled against his chest now, trying to make herself small, trying to disappear, and he felt her entire little body tremble. When he touched her skin again, he confirmed it was icy, cold as ice, despite the suffocating heat of the London summer night. "I'm calling a doctor," he said, already pulling his phone from his pocket with one hand while holding Isabella with the other. "Now." "There's no need," Patricia said, and now there was an urgency in her voice that wasn't there before. "Robert, you're being utterly dramatic. It's just a phase. She'll get better naturally. There's no need to involve doctors, make a scene, create problems where no problems exist." "A phase?" Robert repeated, incredulous, feeling anger swell like a wave within him. "My daughter is malnourished, Patricia. She weighs less than a 4-year-old. This is not a phase, this is neglect." The silence that followed was dense and heavy as molten lead, Patricia crossed her arms over her chest, and for the first time since Robert had known her, the smile completely vanished from her face, revealing something beneath that was cold and hard as stone. "You weren't here," she said, each word laden with barely contained venom. "You don't know what we've been through. Isabella is an extremely difficult child. She won't eat, throws tantrums all the time, refuses to follow any rules. I did my best under the circumstances, I did, more than anyone else would in my place." Robert felt a wave of nausea rise in his throat. "She's 7 years old, Patricia, 7 years old. She's a child, and you are the adult who was supposed to be looking after her while I was away working to support this family." Isabella stirred in his arms, and Robert heard a whisper so low he could barely understand it. "Daddy, I tried to be good. I promise I tried really hard. I did everything she told me. But it was never enough. It was never enough." Robert's heart didn't just break. It shattered into 1,000 pieces inside his chest. He kissed his daughter's head, feeling her hair, once thick and shiny, now thin and lifeless, smelling faintly of something not quite clean. "You didn't do anything wrong, my little one," he said, his voice breaking. "None of this is your fault. Nothing. Do you hear me? It's not your fault." Patricia scoffed, a sound of pure disdain, and turned to leave the room. "We'll talk about this tomorrow when you're more rational and less dramatic," she said, her words flowing with calculated coldness. "When you can think clearly instead of panicking unnecessarily." She started to leave, but Robert called out to her, his voice cutting through the air like a sharp blade. "Don't you leave this house, Patricia. We're not done with this conversation yet." She stopped at the door, but didn't turn around. "I'm tired, Robert. I'm going to my room. We'll talk in the morning." Then she left, her high heels echoing down the wooden hallway, each step sounding like a final sentence. Robert remained there, on his daughter's bedroom floor, holding that fragile, broken little body, trying to understand how this had happened under his own roof, how he had allowed it, how he had trusted so blindly, accepted every excuse, ignored every warning sign his instinct had raised. "Isabella," he said softly, moving her just enough to look into her sunken eyes. "I need you to be very brave now and tell me what happened while I was away. Everything. Can you do that for Daddy?" The girl looked at the door through which Patricia had left, and the fear on her little face was so intense, so visceral, that Robert felt bile rise in his throat. Isabella shook her head slightly, her lips trembling. "She said I can't tell," she whispered, the words coming out brokenly. "She said if I tell you anything, you'll be angry with me. You'll send me away. You'll leave me alone forever in some dark place where no one will ever find me. And I don't want to be alone, Daddy. Please don't leave me alone." Robert felt tears burn his eyes, a cold, controlled anger replacing the initial shock. "Isabella, look at me," he said firmly, holding her thin little face between his hands. "I will never, do you hear me, never send you away. You are my daughter, my princess, my whole world. No matter what happens, no matter what you tell me, I will protect you always. But for that, I need to know the truth. I need you to trust me." Isabella looked at him for a long moment, her sunken eyes seeming to evaluate, weigh, decide. Then finally she began to cry. Not a loud or dramatic cry, but silent tears that streamed down her hollow cheeks, wetting the fabric of her dress where they fell. "She doesn't let me eat, Daddy," Isabella whispered. "She puts food on my plate, but she doesn't let me eat it. She watches and counts every bite. She says I need to learn to be perfect, that Mummy left because I wasn't good enough. She locks me in my room when she goes out with her friends. Sometimes I'm alone all day long and there's only a glass of water. And I'm so hungry all the time. My stomach hurts so much." Every word was a stab to Robert's chest, but Isabella continued, as if now that she had started speaking she couldn't stop. "She takes away my tablet, my books, my toys. She says I don't deserve them. She says if I tell anyone, you'll stop loving me. She says I'm an ugly, fat, lazy child, and that's why Mummy preferred to leave rather than stay with me. And I tried to be good, Daddy. I tried so hard, but it's never enough." Robert pulled Isabella back into his arms and held her tightly, rocking her gently as she cried against his chest. The pieces of the puzzle began to fit together, forming a terrifying and complete picture. The unanswered calls, The constant excuses, the forced estrangement from Julia, the 5 months he had spent away were not just a period of intense work and exhausting travel. They were 5 months of silent, systematic torture for his daughter inside her own home. "It's going to be okay," he whispered, but it was a lie, and they both knew it. Nothing was okay. Nothing would be okay for a long time, but he needed to say something, needed to promise something, even if they were just empty words in that moment of horror. "I promise it's going to be okay. Daddy will fix everything." He knew that fix was too weak a word for what needed to be done, but it was a start. It had to be. Robert rose from the bedroom floor with Isabella still in his arms, and every muscle in his body seemed to protest the movement. It wasn't the fatigue from the trip. It was the overwhelming weight of guilt that now materialized into a physical pain, piercing every fiber of his being. He looked around his daughter's room, really looked for the first time, and what he saw confirmed his worst fears. The room he remembered, filled with toys, books, colorful drawings on the walls, now felt strange, too clean, too organized. The shelves that once overflowed with stuffed animals and dolls were almost empty. The children's bookshelf that Marina had so carefully filled was half bare. The drawings Isabella used to make and proudly hang on a photo line had disappeared. The room looked more like a hotel room than a 7-year-old's space. "We're getting out of here," he said, determined. "I'm taking you somewhere safe, and first thing tomorrow morning we'll find a doctor." "No, actually. We're going right now." "What about Patricia?" Isabella asked, her voice trembling, her little eyes wide with fear. "Don't worry about her. You just need to worry about getting well. Daddy will take care of everything." Robert walked to Isabella's closet and grabbed a small backpack with a unicorn print. He started putting some clothes inside, grabbing jackets because he knew the hospital's air conditioning would be strong. Isabella clung to him with one hand, while timidly pointing to the dresser with the other. "Daddy, Mr. Whiskers," she whispered. Robert looked where she pointed and saw a battered, clearly well-loved teddy bear, half hidden behind the dresser, as if it had been thrown there. He picked up the bear and handed it to Isabella, who hugged it with an intensity that broke his heart once more. "There you go, my princess, let's go." He went down the stairs with Isabella in his arms and the backpack slung over his shoulder. Patricia was in the living room, sitting on the white Italian leather sofa, holding a glass of white wine. She had changed clothes and now wore a silk robe, her hair in a casual bun, her posture relaxed, as if nothing out of the ordinary was happening. When she saw Robert coming down with Isabella and the backpack, her face hardened. "Where do you think you're going?" she asked, her voice controlled but with a sharp edge of threat. "Away from here," Robert replied, walking straight for the front door without looking back. "You can't just take the girl in the middle of the night." Patricia stood up, the glass still in her hand. "I'm her stepmother. I have legal rights. You can't make unilateral decisions about her without consulting me." Robert stopped and turned, facing the woman he had entrusted with the most precious thing in his life. "Rights? You lost any rights when you decided to mistreat my daughter, when you deprived her of food, when you locked her in her room, when you made her believe she didn't deserve to be loved. Don't come near her. Ever again." Patricia laughed, and it was a cold, calculated sound, completely devoid of genuine humor. "Do you think anyone will believe you? I'm well known in this city, Robert. I sit on charity boards, organize events for children's hospitals. I have friends in London's best social circles. You were out of the country for 5 months. 5 months, Robert. Who will believe I'm the villain in this story? A thin child can mean 1,000 things. Eating disorder, anxiety, emotional problems. And who was absent all that time? You." The words were calculated to hit hard, and they did. But Robert wouldn't back down. Not this time. Not when Isabella was trembling in his arms, her fragile little body pressed against his, as if he were the only thing between her and the abyss. "I don't care who you know or what you are," he said, his voice low but laden with determination. "This ends today. And if you try to stop me from taking my daughter to receive medical care, I'm calling the police right now." Patricia took another step towards them, and Robert saw Isabella shrink even further against his chest. "You'll regret this," Patricia said, each word dripping venom. "I'll destroy you." I'll destroy your reputation, your company, everything. When I'm done with you, there'll be nothing left." Robert simply turned and walked out the door, ignoring Patricia's increasingly loud shouts behind him. Charles was still at the gate of the estate, talking to one of the security guards. When he saw Robert hurrying out with Isabella in his arms, he cut the conversation short and ran to the car, opening the back door. "To the Royal London Hospital," Robert ordered as soon as they got in. "And quickly, Charles, it's urgent." The driver looked in the rearview mirror, saw the girl huddled in his employer's arms, her pale face and sunken eyes, and sped off without asking questions. The Mercedes left the estate with its tires squealing on the asphalt. During the drive through the empty streets of London, Robert called the only number he truly trusted at that moment. The phone rang 3 times before a female voice answered, heavy with sleep and confusion. "Hello? Robert? It's almost midnight. What happened?" Julia. Marina's sister, Isabella's aunt, the person he had pushed away, ignored, allowed Patricia to block. Guilt tightened his chest even more. "Julia," he said, and his voice faltered, breaking in the middle. "I messed everything up. You were right about everything. I need you. Isabella needs you." There was a tense silence on the other end of the line. Robert could imagine Julia sitting up in bed, processing the words, anger and fear mixing on her face. She had tried to warn him. She had tried so many times. "Where are you?" Her voice was tense, controlled. "Going to the Royal London. It's Isabella. She's—" He looked at his daughter in his arms. Her eyes closed now, her little body finally relaxing after months of constant tension. "She's very ill, Julia. Very ill. I'm coming there now. Don't leave her side until I get there. Do you hear me, Robert? Don't let anyone convince you to leave her side." "I won't. I promise." The call ended. Robert looked out the window, seeing the city pass in blurs of light. London at midnight was a different place. The streets of the central region still had movement, people leaving, bars, homeless sleeping on pavements, ride-share cars circulating. But as they approached the Whitechapel borough where the hospital was located, the streets became emptier, quieter. The Royal London Hospital was a benchmark in medical excellence, a private hospital that served the London elite and had international affiliations. The emergency entrance was lit, and Robert got out of the car even before Charles had completely stopped. He practically ran through the automatic gate, Isabella in his arms. The pediatric emergency reception was a spacious and modern area with walls decorated with cheerful drawings of animals and plants, comfortable armchairs, televisions playing, cartoons even at that hour. But Robert barely registered any of it. He went straight to the counter where a receptionist in a light blue uniform greeted him with a professional smile. "Good evening, sir. How can I help you?" "My daughter," Robert said, his words tumbling out. "She needs a doctor now, please." The receptionist looked at Isabella, and her face changed immediately. The professional smile vanished, replaced by genuine concern. She picked up the phone and spoke quickly to someone. "I'm calling a doctor now. Please have a seat over there. Someone will attend to you immediately." "What's her name?" "Isabella Alden, 7 years old." The receptionist typed quickly on the computer. "Do you have insurance?" "Yes, Bupa. But it doesn't matter. I'll pay privately if necessary. Just, please, call someone quickly." It wasn't even 2 minutes before a young doctor in a white coat appeared through the side door. She was Asian, with black hair tied in a ponytail, attentive eyes that immediately fixed on Isabella. "I'm Dr. Tanaka, on-call pediatrician. Let's go to an examination room, please." Robert followed her down a lit corridor to a room equipped with a pediatric examination bed, medical devices, and superhero drawings on the walls trying to make the environment less frightening for children. The doctor helped Robert lay Isabella on the bed, and as she began the examination, her face grew increasingly serious. She used a stethoscope to listen to Isabella's heart and lungs, checked her blood pressure with a special device for children, examined her eyes with a small flashlight, gently palpated her abdomen. Isabella remained quiet throughout, only flinching occasionally when something hurt. "Mr. Alden," the doctor finally said, taking off her gloves, "I need to ask some questions. How long has Isabella been like this?" Robert felt the weight of the question like a punch. "I was traveling," he began to explain, "5 months out of the country. When I arrived today, I found her like this. And who was looking after her during this period? My wife, her stepmother." Dr. Tanaka made notes on a clipboard, her face carefully neutral, but Robert could see the tension in her shoulders. "Isabella is severely malnourished. Her weight is critically below what is expected for her age. I will order some urgent blood tests to check for vitamin and mineral deficiencies, as well as liver and kidney function. We also need to do a more comprehensive assessment." "Is it serious?" Robert asked, though he already knew the answer. "Yes, it's very serious. A child doesn't reach this state overnight. This took weeks, possibly months of food deprivation." The doctor paused, choosing her words. "Mr. Alden, by law, I am obliged to report suspected cases of child neglect or abuse to social services. Do you understand that?" Robert nodded, feeling tears burn his eyes. "I understand, and I agree. My daughter has been mistreated. I know that now." The doctor placed a gentle hand on his shoulder. "We're going to take care of her, I promise. But it will take time. She'll need to be admitted, begin careful refeeding, and undergo psychological counseling. Do whatever is necessary. Money is not an issue." "It's not about money, Mr. Alden. It's about patience, care, and love. Your daughter has been traumatized. Her body will recover, but her mind will take longer." At that moment, there was an urgent knock on the door, and a woman entered without waiting for a reply. Julia. She was in her early 40s with short brown hair, wearing jeans and a simple blouse as if she had rushed out of the house. Her eyes immediately found Isabella on the examination bed, and she let out a strangled sound of anguish. "My God," she whispered, approaching. "Isabella, my little one." Isabella opened her eyes, and when she saw her aunt, for the first time since Robert had arrived home, a small smile appeared on her pale face. "Auntie Ju." Julia held Isabella's thin little hand, tears streaming freely down her face. "I'm here, darling. Auntie is here, and won't let anything bad happen to you ever again." She turned to Robert, and there was anger in her eyes, but also something that could be compassion. "I tried to warn you," she said, her voice trembling. "Months ago. I tried to tell you something was wrong, but you wouldn't listen." "I know," Robert replied, and there was no excuse that could justify it. "I know, and I'll carry that forever. But now I need to fix it. We need to fix it." Dr. Tanaka interrupted. "I'll arrange for her admission. Meanwhile, a nurse will come to collect blood for tests, and we'll start intravenous hydration. Isabella will be under observation tonight, and tomorrow we can discuss long-term treatment." She left the room, leaving Robert and Julia with Isabella. The two adults remained silent for a moment, just listening to the girl's light breathing. "Does Patricia know you're here?" Julia finally asked. "She knows, and she threatened to destroy my reputation, my company, everything." Julia let out a bitter laugh. "Of course she threatened. That's what people like her do when they're losing control. But we're not going to let her get away with it, Robert. My sister entrusted Isabella to you, and you entrusted Isabella to a monster." "I know." Robert ran a hand over his face, exhausted. "I need a lawyer, a good one, specialized in family law and child protection." Julia pulled out her phone. "I know someone, Dr. Henry Evans. He worked with a friend of mine on a difficult custody case. He's relentless when it comes to defending children. Call him, no matter the hour. Tell him it's urgent." While Julia made the call outside the room, a nurse entered with an equipment cart. She smiled gently at Isabella. "Hi, sweetie. I'm going to take a little bit of blood, okay? It'll only hurt a tiny bit." Isabella looked at Robert, fear in her eyes. "Daddy stay?" "Daddy stays," he confirmed, holding her other hand. "I'm not leaving here." The collection was quick, and Isabella was brave, only making a face when the needle went in. Afterwards, the nurse installed an IV line and began the hydration. "I'll bring a more comfortable hospital gown for her," the nurse said. "And do you want anything? Coffee? Water?" "Coffee would be great," Robert said. "It's going to be a long night." The nurse nodded understandingly and left. Moments later, Julia returned, putting away her phone. "Henry will be here first thing tomorrow morning." He said not to leave here, not to leave Isabella alone for a second, and not to speak with Patricia without him present. Robert nodded. "I don't intend to leave her alone ever again." The following hours passed in a blur of tests, doctors coming and going, forms being filled. Around 3 in the morning, Isabella was finally transferred to a private room on the pediatric floor. It was a beautiful room, with walls painted with clouds and birds, a comfortable hospital bed, a sofa bed for companions, a television and a private bathroom. Isabella fell asleep almost immediately, physically and emotionally, exhausted. Robert and Julia took turns on the sofa bed, though neither of them truly slept. They just watched the girl sleep, listening to the constant beep of the heart monitor, seeing the IV drip slowly into her vein. Around 6 in the morning, as daylight began to stream through the window, Dr. Tanaka returned with a clipboard full of test results. Her face was serious, more serious than the night before. "The results are very concerning," she began, sitting on a chair beside the bed. "Isabella has severe anemia, deficiencies in vitamin D, vitamin B12, iron, calcium, her liver. Function is compromised. There are clear signs of chronic dehydration. We also found some bruises in different stages of healing on her arms and legs that suggest physical restraint or repeated falls due to weakness." Robert felt nausea rise. How long for her to recover? Physically, with proper nutrition and supplementation, a few months, but refeeding must be gradual, very careful, because her body is so debilitated that it cannot receive normal food immediately. There are serious risks if we don't do this correctly. Emotionally, the doctor sighed. "That will take much longer. I will refer her to our child psychologist specializing in trauma. Isabella will need intensive therapy, probably for years." "We'll do everything," Robert said, his voice firm. "Everything that's necessary." Dr. Tanaka made a few more notes. "As I informed you yesterday, I have already made the report to social services. A social worker will come today to interview you, and when she is ready, Isabella too. And there's something else." The doctor hesitated, as if she didn't want to say it, but knew she had to. "We found small lesions in Isabella's mouth, consistent with repeated episodes of extreme hunger. Children in this state sometimes eat non-food items, dirt, pieces of paper, even their own fingernails. It's a behavior of absolute desperation." Robert covered his face with his hands, his shoulders trembling. Julia placed a hand on his back, herself fighting back tears. How had he allowed his daughter to reach such a point of absolute despair? How had he ignored all the signs? How had he blindly trusted someone who tortured a child? "She's safe now," Julia said softly, both to Robert and to herself. "Now we're going to take care of her, and we're going to make Patricia pay for every second of suffering she caused." Around 9 in the morning, a man in a grey suit knocked on the bedroom door. He was tall, probably in his 60s, with perfectly combed grey hair, metal-framed glasses, a leather briefcase under his arm. He entered with the confident posture of someone accustomed to courtrooms and legal battles. "Dr. Henry Evans," he introduced himself, shaking Robert's hand and then Julia's. "Julia told me over the phone about the situation. I've brought some documents so we can start immediately." He pulled up a chair and opened his briefcase, revealing stacks of legal forms. "First, we will request an emergency protective order preventing Patricia Montgomery from approaching Isabella. I've already drafted the request. I just need your signature. Second, we will file for the revocation of her parental authority regarding the shared custody she had as a stepmother. Third, we will initiate criminal proceedings for child abuse, neglect, and intimidation of a minor." "How long will this take?" Robert asked, taking the pen the lawyer extended to him. "It depends on the judge and the quality of the evidence, but with the detailed medical report, the social services report, and eventually Isabella's testimony in a protected environment with a specialized psychologist, we have an extremely solid case. The physical evidence is undeniable." "Patricia said she's going to destroy me," Robert admitted, signing the documents. "That she has contacts, influence in the city." Dr. Henry smiled, but it was a cold, humorless smile. "They all say that. And sometimes they even try. They manipulate the media, hire press agents, leak false stories. But in the end, in a court of law, what matters are concrete facts, irrefutable medical evidence and the child's well-being. And we have all those elements solidly on our side. He spent the next 2 hours asking extremely detailed questions, noting every piece of information, every date, every incident Robert could remember. He took photos of the medical reports with Dr. Tanaka's permission, recorded audio depositions, meticulously building a case that would be difficult to overturn. When he finished, he had enough material to start a legal battle. "I will file the petitions later today," he said, as he prepared to leave. "The protective order should be granted within the next few hours. Keep me informed of any moves Patricia makes, any calls, messages, attempts at contact, and do not speak with her under any circumstances. Without my presence, nothing, not a word." "Understood," Robert agreed. The day dragged on, slow and heavy. Isabella woke around 11, was fed a special liquid diet that her weakened digestive system could process without further harm, and then fell back asleep. A hospital social worker appeared in the early afternoon, a gentle middle-aged woman who asked careful questions, examined the medical reports with an increasingly serious expression, and promised to follow the case personally. Around 4 in the afternoon, Robert's phone rang. It was Charles, the driver, and his voice was tense. "Dr. Alden, Mrs. Montgomery is here at the hospital. She tried to go up to Isabella's room. The reception security guards are holding her, but she's making a huge scene. She's screaming, threatening to sue the hospital, saying she has rights." Robert felt his blood run cold. "Don't let her up. No way. I'm calling the lawyer now." He called Dr. Henry, who said he was 15 minutes away and already had the protective order granted by an on-call judge. Robert went down to the hospital lobby, his heart pounding, prepared for another confrontation. Patricia was in the middle of the lobby, surrounded by 3 security guards, who maintained a respectful but firm distance. She wore an impeccable white dress, possibly Italian designer, high heels, a branded handbag, large dark sunglasses, even though she was inside the building. Her hair was perfect, her makeup flawless. She looked like she had just come from a fashion magazine photo shoot, not someone who was being prevented from seeing a child she supposedly loved. When she saw Robert descending the stairs, she advanced, but the security guards gently held her by the arms. "You can't stop me from seeing Isabella," she screamed, her voice echoing through the lobby and attracting glances from doctors, nurses, visitors, and patients. "I'm her stepmother. I have rights. This is kidnapping." At that moment, the automatic doors opened, and Dr. Henry entered, accompanied by a uniformed court officer. The lawyer walked directly to Patricia, extending an official document with the court seal. "Mrs. Patricia Montgomery," he asked formally. "Who wants to know?" she retorted, pulling off her sunglasses. "I am Mr. Robert Alden's lawyer. This is an emergency protective order granted by the duty judge of the Central Law Courts. You are formally prohibited from approaching Isabella Alden within a radius of 500 meters, from contacting her by any means, be it telephone, message, social media, or through third parties. Violation of this order will result in immediate custodial arrest." Patricia snatched the document from the lawyer's hands, read it quickly, and her face contorted into an expression of pure fury. "This is ridiculous," she screamed, throwing the paper on the floor. "That girl is problematic. She has eating disorders, refuses food, and now you want to blame me because she's difficult? I tried to help her. I did everything I could." The court officer stepped forward, picking up the document from the floor. "Ma'am, the notification is officially served. I need you to leave the hospital immediately. If you do not do so voluntarily, I will be obliged to call the police." Patricia looked around the lobby, realizing that dozens of people were observing the scene. Her face was red, her eyes glistening with tears that could be of anger or frustration at losing control. She looked directly at Robert, and there was so much hatred in that gaze that he felt a chill run down his spine. "You'll regret this," she said, each word laden with distilled venom. "All of you. I have powerful friends. I know judges, prosecutors, journalists. I will destroy your lives. I will expose Robert as the negligent father he is. I will show everyone that Isabella is a manipulative child who invented stories. When I'm done, you'll have nothing left." Then she turned, her high heels echoing dramatically on the marble floor of the lobby, and exited through the automatic doors, leaving a trail of expensive perfume and threats that hung in the air like toxic smoke. Robert went back up to the room, his legs trembling slightly from adrenaline. When he entered, Isabella was awake, sitting on the bed with her teddy bear in her lap, looking out the window where the buildings of London stretched to the hazy horizon. "Daddy," she said when she saw him, her voice small. "Did Patricia come here?" "She did, but she won't anymore." Robert sat on the edge of the bed, taking Isabella's cold little hand in his. "I promise she won't bother you again. Never again." Isabella nodded, seeming to process the information. After a moment of silence, she asked, almost in a whisper, "Daddy, can I ask you something?" "Of course, my little one. Anything you want." "Did Mummy really leave because I wasn't good enough?" Robert felt his heart shatter into 1,000 pieces again. He pulled Isabella very carefully into his arms, taking care not to disconnect the IV tubes and heart monitor. "No, my love. Never, ever think that. Mummy loved you more than anything in this world, more than her own life. She didn't choose to leave. She became very ill, in a way no doctor could save, and she had to go. But it wasn't your fault. It was never your fault. And she loved you until her very last second, until her very last heartbeat. Even when I did wrong things, even when I wasn't perfect. You were never imperfect, Isabella. You are exactly as you should be, perfect in your own way. And everything Patricia told you were lies, cruel lies from a very sick person. Mummy didn't leave you. Life took her from us. But her love for you lives on, here." Robert placed his hand over Isabella's heart. "And here." He placed his hand over his own heart. "Forever." Isabella hugged her father, and for the first time in 5 long months, Robert felt that perhaps, just perhaps, there was real hope of mending what had been so cruelly broken. It wouldn't be easy. It wouldn't be quick. But now, finally, they were on the right path. Outside, London continued its frantic and indifferent routine, millions of people living their own stories of love, pain, struggle, and hope. But inside that hospital room, a little girl was beginning the slow, painful, and obstacle-filled journey back to life. And a father swore with every fibre of his being that he would never fail her again, not this time, never again. The following days in the hospital transformed into a carefully orchestrated routine of physical and emotional recovery. Isabella remained hospitalized for almost 2 weeks, a period Robert lived as if in suspension, each hour marked by small progresses and the painful echoes of what had been lost. Dr. Tanaka visited Isabella 3 times a day, carefully monitoring every aspect of her recovery. Refeeding was a delicate and dangerous process. After such a long time in a state of severe malnutrition, Isabella's body couldn't simply return to eating normally. There were serious risks, the doctor explained, of severe complications where the overwhelmed body could suffer damage from receiving nutrients too quickly. They started slowly. Special nutritive liquids, small portions of soft, easily digestible foods. Each day, calories were gradually increased, always monitoring blood levels, cardiac function, vital signs. Isabella ate with hesitation at first, as if expecting someone to take her food away at any moment. Robert sat by her bedside during each meal, gently encouraging, never forcing, just being present. The hospital's child psychologist, Dr. Eleanor Reed, began sessions on the 3rd day. She was a woman in her 50s with grey hair, round glasses, a soft and extremely patient voice. The first sessions were just her and Isabella playing, drawing, creating a safe space where the girl could begin to process the trauma. "It's important not to rush," she explained to Robert and Julia in a private meeting. Isabella suffered months of very difficult situations. She was convinced that she was guilty for the loss of her mother, that she didn't deserve love or food. Deconstructing these beliefs will take time, patience, and a lot of care. While Isabella recovered, the outside world exploded into frantic activity. Dr. Henry worked tirelessly, building a rock-solid legal case. He hired private investigators who began to unearth the truth about the last 5 months of Isabella's life. What they discovered was even worse than Robert had imagined. A week after Isabella's admission, Dr. Henry arrived at the hospital with a thick folder of documents and a grave expression. He asked to speak with Robert privately, and they met in the small meeting room on the pediatric floor. "Robert," the lawyer began, opening the folder, "my investigators spoke with several former employees from your house. What they recounted is extremely disturbing, but it's also exactly the kind of evidence we need." He pulled out written depositions. Francis Olson, the housekeeper who worked in the house for 3 months during Robert's absence, was fired by Patricia after questioning Isabella's treatment. According to her testimony, Patricia gave strict orders to serve minuscule portions of food to the girl, forbade employees from giving any extra food even when Isabella begged with hunger, and kept the child locked in her room for hours, sometimes entire days. Robert felt nausea rise. "Continue," he said, his voice hoarse. Mark Spencer, the gardener, testified that on several occasions he heard Isabella crying and asking to leave her room, banging on the door. When he mentioned this to Patricia, she said the girl was being punished for bad behavior and that he should focus on his work and not on family matters. Dr. Henry turned more pages. Sandra Collins, the private piano teacher Patricia hired, noticed that Isabella was increasingly thin and apathetic during lessons. When she expressed concern, Patricia said the girl had eating problems and was undergoing treatment, asking Sandra not to interfere. Sandra grew suspicious, but didn't know who to turn to since you were out of the country, and Patricia controlled all external contact. Each revelation was like a stab to Robert's chest. How had he not seen? How had he not noticed? "There's more," the lawyer continued, his voice hardening. "We investigated Patricia's financial records during the period you were away. She spent extraordinary amounts, over £200,000 on designer clothes, jewelry, aesthetic treatments, trips to luxury resorts with friends. Meanwhile, records show that virtually no money was spent on Isabella. No new clothes, no toys, no books. The girl was completely neglected while Patricia lived like a queen." Robert clenched his fists on the table. "Is this enough for the case?" Dr. Henry smiled coldly. "This, combined with the medical reports, the employees' testimonies, and eventually Isabella's testimony when she's ready, is more than enough. Patricia will not escape this." But more surprises were coming. On Isabella's 10th day of hospitalization, one of Dr. Henry's investigators made an extraordinary discovery. The Alden house had security cameras installed, something Robert had completely forgotten. The cameras were discreet, mainly installed at external access points, but one of them covered part of the second-floor hallway, including Isabella's bedroom door. The recordings were stored on a cloud server, and Patricia, apparently, either didn't know about it or forgot to delete them. The investigator gained legal access through a court order, and what the recordings showed was devastating. Hours of Isabella banging on her bedroom door, trying to open the handle, crying, begging to be let out. Patricia walking past the hallway, clearly hearing the child's pleas for help, and simply ignoring them, sometimes even smiling. In one particularly shocking video, Isabella manages to open the door and stumbles out into the hallway, weak and desperate. Patricia appears, pushes the girl back into the room, and the camera perfectly captures the look of absolute terror on Isabella's face before the door closes again. When Dr. Henry showed the recordings to Robert on a tablet, he had to rush out of the room. The image of his daughter, so small, so frightened, begging for help that wouldn't come, was something that would burn in his memory forever. "These recordings are unquestionable," Dr. Henry said when Robert returned, pale and trembling. "They are irrefutable evidence. Patricia can hire the best lawyer in London, but there's no defense against this." Meanwhile, Patricia didn't stand still. True to her threat, she began a calculated campaign to destroy Robert's reputation and create a favorable narrative for herself. She hired an expensive press agent and began leaking selected stories to gossip blogs and sensationalist media. Headlines began to appear. "Businessman abandons daughter for 5 months." "Dedicated stepmother unfairly prevented from seeing stepdaughter." "Absent father accuses wife after months of travel." The articles painted Robert as a negligent father who worked too much and was now trying to shift the blame. They painted Patricia as a dedicated stepmother who did her best under difficult circumstances with a problematic child and an absent husband. Julia was furious when she saw the articles. "She's manipulating everything," she said, throwing her phone on the hospital waiting room table. "She's playing the victim. How dare she?" "It's what people like her do," Dr. Henry calmly replied. "They manipulate the narrative, play on public emotions, try to create doubt. But when we get to court, the truth will speak louder." During those first months, small miracles happened daily at the hospital. Isabella began to smile again, timidly at first, then more frequently. A nurse brought children's books, and Robert spent hours reading to her, doing different voices for each character. Listening to the delicate laughter he thought he would never hear again. Julia visited every day after work, always bringing small gifts, flowers, drawings made by her university students who sent messages of encouragement to the girl they didn't know but were rooting for. There were difficult moments too. Nightmares that made Isabella wake up screaming in the middle of the night, calling for help, believing she was still locked in that room. Moments when she refused food, the fear of being punished still echoing in her mind. Therapy sessions where she cried inconsolably, all the repressed trauma finally finding a safe outlet. But each day was a step forward. Each completed meal was a victory. Each nightmare that passed without leaving too deep scars was progress. And through it all, Robert and Julia were there, a constant and unwavering presence, showing Isabella that she would never be alone again. 2 months after the initial hospitalization, when Isabella was finally discharged, it was a moment of joy mixed with anxiety. She had gained almost 3 kilograms, considerable progress, but still far from a healthy weight for her age. The dark circles under her eyes had diminished, though not completely disappeared. Her cheeks were beginning to regain color, a soft pink replacing the unhealthy pallor. But everyone knew, especially Dr. Tanaka and Dr. Eleanor, that physical recovery was only the beginning. Emotional recovery, the rebuilding of trust, the healing of the invisible but deep wounds in Isabella's psyche, would take much, much longer. Robert made a difficult but necessary decision. He requested a temporary leave of absence from the company, delegating his responsibilities to trusted directors. His priority now was Isabella, and nothing else mattered. Julia, in turn, took an unpaid leave from her job as a university professor. The two adults formed a united front of protection and care for the girl. The housing issue was resolved quickly. Robert couldn't go back to the Belgravia house. That place was contaminated with terrible memories for Isabella. Besides, Patricia still technically lived there, and although there was a restraining order, Robert didn't want to take any risks. Julia offered her flat in Notting Hill, a cozy 3-bedroom space in an old but charming building. It didn't have the mansion's luxury, but it had something the mansion never had: human warmth, emotional security, genuine love. Isabella would have her own room, decorated with the colors she chose, full of toys and books she could truly use. The move happened on a sunny March afternoon. Robert hired a specialized company to retrieve Isabella's belongings from the Belgravia house, making sure Patricia was not present during the process. He personally supervised each box, each item, wanting to ensure nothing important was left behind. They brought clothes that now seemed too large for Isabella's still fragile little body, toys she had barely touched in recent months, books with pages still crisp from so little handling. Mr. Whiskers the bear, properly washed and restored, earned a place of honor on her new bed. The room Julia prepared for Isabella was the complete opposite of the sterile room she had left behind. The walls were painted a soft blue that Isabella personally chose, with white and yellow accents. There were low shelves filled with books within her reach, a small desk near the window where sunlight streamed in generously, a soft rug where she could sit and play. Julia hung light curtains with star patterns, placed colorful cushions on the bed, filling the space with light, warmth, and possibilities. On the first night in her new room, Isabella took a long time to fall asleep. She lay looking at the ceiling, at the walls, at the organized toys on the shelves, as if she couldn't believe it was all real, that no one would take it from her, that she was truly safe. Robert sat by her bedside, holding her little hand until she finally relaxed and sleep came. The daily routine was carefully constructed to give Isabella structure without suffocating her. Breakfast always at 8, prepared by Julia or Robert, with varied options Isabella could choose. Afterwards, a few hours of light educational activities at home, as they had decided to wait a little longer before reintroducing school and all the social pressure that would come with it. Lunch at noon, always nutritionally balanced but also with things Isabella liked. Afternoons dedicated to relaxing activities, painting, reading, sometimes just watching cartoons curled up on the sofa between Robert and Julia. Dinner at 6, bath at 7, bedtime stories at 8, lights out at 8:30. 3 times a week there was therapy with Dr. Eleanor. Twice a week, consultations with Dr. Tanaka to monitor physical progress. Once a week, sessions with a nutritionist specializing in child malnutrition recovery. Isabella's life was full of medical and therapeutic appointments, but each of them was an investment in her healing, a step towards the full and healthy person she deserved to be. While daily life reorganized, the legal process advanced relentlessly. Dr. Henry filed 3 simultaneous actions. First, a request for permanent custody for Julia, with Robert retaining full paternal custody, but recognizing that Julia would be the primary caregiver while he restructured himself. Second, a process for annulment of the marriage with Patricia based on fraud and bad faith. Third, a formal lawsuit for severe neglect, intimidation, and inappropriate situations involving a minor. The first court hearing took place 3 months after Isabella's hospitalization. The Royal Courts of Justice in London were an imposing building in the city centre, with long corridors and courtrooms that echoed with decades of human dramas. Robert, Julia, and Dr. Henry arrived early, prepared for a long battle. Patricia appeared accompanied by a famous barrister, known for defending controversial cases and using aggressive tactics. She was impeccable as always, discreet but expensive dress, light makeup, the posture of someone with nothing to fear. When she passed Robert in the corridor, she didn't even look in his direction. The hearing was presided over by a judge in her 50s, Judge Martha Turner, known for her firmness and commitment to child protection. She heard both sides, examined the medical documents, read the employees' testimonies, watched edited excerpts of the security recordings. The judge's face grew increasingly serious as the evidence accumulated. Patricia's barrister tried to argue that Robert was the truly negligent one, that he was absent, that Patricia did her best. He tried to suggest that Isabella had pre-existing emotional problems, that she exaggerated, that she was being manipulated against her stepmother. But then came the decisive moment. Isabella, after intense months of careful preparation with Dr. Eleanor, was ready to give her testimony, or at least as ready as a traumatized 7-year-old could be to relive the worst moments of her life before strangers who would decide her future. The preparation had been long and delicate. Dr. Eleanor spent weeks working with Isabella, using dolls and drawings to help her process and articulate her experiences. She explained repeatedly that telling the truth wasn't being bad, wasn't betraying anyone, it was simply saying what happened, that she wasn't in trouble, wasn't going to be punished, wasn't going to be sent away, that Robert and Julia would love her no matter what she said, that she was safe now and would remain safe. By law, children testify in a protected environment via video conference, accompanied by a psychologist and away from the pressure of the courtroom. The special room at the court was carefully prepared, walls painted with soft colors, toys casually scattered, a large window letting in natural light. It looked nothing like a courtroom. It looked more like a playroom in a primary school. Isabella entered the room, holding Dr. Eleanor's hand with a grip that made her fingers turn white. She wore a simple blue cotton dress that Julia had bought, her hair tied in 2 braids, Mr. Whiskers the bear under her other arm. She looked at the camera with wide eyes, nervous, scared, but also determined in a way that only children who have survived the unbearable can be. In the main courtroom, the room fell into absolute silence when the large screen lit up. Patricia sat rigidly at the defense table, her face carefully neutral, but Robert, who knew her, could see the tension in every muscle, the thinly disguised panic in her eyes. She knew this was the crucial moment. If Isabella could testify convincingly, there would be no saving herself. The courtroom fell into absolute silence when the screen lit up. Isabella appeared seated in a colorful and welcoming room, Dr. Eleanor by her side. The girl was visibly better, with more weight, more color in her face, but there was still a fragility about her that broke one's heart. The judge asked gentle questions. Isabella, in a low but firm voice, told her story. The denied meals, the locked room, the nights of hunger, the cruel words about her mother, the constant fear. She didn't accuse dramatically, she simply recounted with a child's simple honesty what she had lived through. When Isabella finished and the screen went dark, there were tears in the eyes of several people present in the room, including the clerk and the court officer. The judge looked at Patricia with an expression of thinly veiled disgust. The decision came 2 weeks later. The judge granted permanent temporary custody to Julia, with a recommendation for continuous psychological counseling for Isabella. She ruled that Patricia must stay away from the girl, prohibited from any contact. She forwarded the case for deeper investigation by the Crown Prosecution Service, recommending that appropriate legal measures be taken. The marriage annulment was granted. Formal proceedings against Patricia were opened by the public prosecutor's office. 6 months later, the trial took place. It was a trial that attracted significant media attention, especially after journalist Paula Morrison published a series of investigative reports detailing the case. Public opinion, initially divided due to Patricia's manipulation, turned completely when the evidence came to light. In court, Patricia tried to maintain her composure, but she was losing. Witness after witness confirmed the pattern of behavior. The security recordings were shown, causing commotion in the room. The medical reports were undeniable. The public prosecutor, a young and idealistic man named Andrew Campbell, presented his case with controlled passion. Patricia Montgomery not only neglected a child under her care, she systematically, deliberately, cruelly tortured a defenseless girl psychologically and physically. She deprived Isabella of basic needs, isolated her, manipulated her, terrorized her. And she did all this while living a life of extreme luxury, spending fortunes on herself while a child under her roof starved. The defense tried to counter-argue, but had little to work with against the mountain of evidence. They tried to argue Isabella's emotional problems, but experts quickly debunked that. They tried to blame Robert for being absent, but the prosecutor pointed out that this did not absolve Patricia of her deliberate actions. The jury deliberated for just 3 hours. When they returned, the verdict was unanimous. Guilty on all charges. The sentence came a week later. Judge Martha Turner, now in her final role in the case, was emphatic in her words. Patricia Montgomery committed acts of deliberate cruelty against a defenseless child who depended on her for survival and protection. She manipulated, lied, terrorized, and almost caused irreversible harm. This court cannot and will not tolerate such behavior. Patricia was sentenced. The sentence included 5 years of imprisonment in a closed regime, with the possibility of progression after serving part of the sentence and good behavior, a substantial fine equivalent to £300,000, which would be donated to child protection institutions, a permanent prohibition from working with children, assuming any guardianship or curatorship role for minors, obligation to compensate Isabella for moral damages in an amount to be deposited in a trust fund until she reached adulthood, and perhaps most painful for someone like Patricia, who so valued her public image, the complete loss of her reputation in the London society she had so carefully cultivated. As the sentence was read, Patricia remained motionless, only her eyes revealing the inner storm. When the court officers approached with handcuffs, she finally reacted. She tried to argue, her voice rising in pitch and despair, saying that it was unfair, that she was the victim, that everyone was conspiring against her. But her mask of control had finally completely cracked, revealing the manipulative and cruel person who had always existed beneath the polished facade. She was led from the courtroom, her screams echoing through the corridors, until silenced by security doors. Robert observed everything with a complex mixture of emotions. It wasn't joy to see someone being taken to prison. It wasn't vengeance he felt. It was something deeper and quieter. It was justice. It was confirmation that the system, sometimes flawed and slow, had worked this time. It was the knowledge that Isabella was finally, definitively, safe. Robert, sitting beside Julia in the court galleries, felt an immense weight lift from his shoulders. It wasn't joy. It wasn't vengeance. It was just relief. Relief that finally justice had been done. The following months brought genuine transformation. Isabella, under Julia's loving care and Robert's increasingly constant presence, began to flourish. She returned to school, initially with fear and hesitation, but gradually making friends, participating in activities, smiling more. Therapy with Dr. Eleanor continued, twice a week, a safe space where Isabella could process her traumas, learn she wasn't to blame, rebuild her self-esteem. There were difficult days, nightmares, moments of panic when something reminded her, but there were also increasingly frequent days of laughter, play, discoveries. Robert completely changed his priorities. He restructured the company to be able to work mainly from home, participating in meetings remotely, traveling only when absolutely necessary, and always for short periods. He was present for breakfast, to help with homework, to read bedtime stories. He was rebuilding his relationship with his daughter, one day at a time. Julia proved to be an extraordinary caregiver. Patient, loving, firm when necessary, always present. She transformed the flat into a true home, full of warmth, laughter, and security. Isabella called her Auntie Ju, and the bonds between the two deepened every day. 1 year after the initial hospitalization, there was a final hearing to formalize permanent custody. The judge, satisfied with the progress reports, officially granted shared custody between Julia and Robert, with Julia as the primary guardian. Isabella was present at the hearing, now 8 years old, visibly healthier, happier. When they left the courts that afternoon, the London sun shone brightly. Isabella held Robert's and Julia's hands, swinging her arms, recounting something funny that happened at school. She was wearing a yellow dress she had chosen herself, her hair tied in 2 braids that Julia had made that morning. "Can we have ice cream?" Isabella asked, looking at the 2 adults with hope. Robert and Julia exchanged a look and smiled. "Of course, my princess," Robert said. "Any flavor you want." They walked through the streets of Notting Hill to an ice cream parlor Isabella adored. The girl ordered 2 flavors, ate happily while chatting animatedly about a drawing she was making in art class. Robert and Julia watched her, their hearts full of a protective and profound love. That evening, in the flat, after Isabella had gone to sleep, Robert and Julia sat in the living room with tea. They talked about the day, about the future, about how wonderfully Isabella was progressing. "You saved her," Robert said, looking at his sister-in-law with infinite gratitude. "When I failed, when I made the worst possible mistakes, you were there." Julia shook her head. "We saved her, together, and Marina would be proud. She entrusted Isabella to you, and even though you stumbled along the way, you got up and fought for her." Robert felt tears burn his eyes. "I think of Marina every day. I wonder what she would say about all of this. She would say that you learned, that you grew, that you are finally being the father Isabella needs." More months passed. Isabella continued to recover, to grow, to transform. She discovered a love for painting, spending hours creating colorful worlds on canvases. She made friends at school, participated in a play, won an award for Best Student in Natural Sciences. On her 9th birthday, Robert and Julia organized a party at the flat. Nothing extravagant, just close friends from school, simple decorations, a chocolate cake Isabella helped choose. The girl was radiant, surrounded by friends, laughing, playing, simply being a happy child. At the end of the party, when the guests had left and Isabella was helping to clear decorations, she stopped and looked at Robert and Julia with a serious expression. "Daddy, Auntie Ju," she said, "can I say something?" "Of course, my love," Robert replied, crouching down to her height. "Anything." Isabella looked at the 2 of them, her brown eyes shining with a wisdom beyond her 9 years. "I just wanted to say that I'm happy, really happy. I know everything was very difficult and scary, but now I have both of you, and I know you love me, and I feel safe. And that's all I ever wanted." Robert pulled her into a tight hug, tears now streaming freely. Julia joined the embrace, the three forming a closed circle of love and protection. "We love you too, my little one," Robert whispered, "more than anything in the world." Outside, London continued its frantic dance, millions of stories unfolding simultaneously in the streets, buildings and homes of the megalopolis. But inside that flat in Notting Hill, a particular story had found its happy ending. It wasn't easy. It wasn't quick. There was pain, trauma, terrible mistakes, and devastating consequences. But in the end, love prevailed. Justice was done. And a girl who was almost destroyed found her way back to life, to joy, to hope. Isabella would grow, always carrying the scars of what she lived through, but also the strength of having survived. Robert would forever carry the guilt of his failures, but also the redemption of having fought for his daughter. Julia would have the satisfaction of having honored her sister's memory, protecting and loving her niece as if she were her own daughter. And Marina, wherever she was, could finally rest in peace, knowing her daughter was safe, loved, and happy. Years later, when Isabella was already a confident and articulate teenager, she painted a picture that she hung in the living room. It was an image of three people holding hands under a bright blue sky, surrounded by colorful flowers. When asked for the title, she smiled and simply said, "New Beginning." Because in the end, that was exactly what they had achieved. Not to erase the past, but to build a better future from the rubble, together, as a family, as survivors, as people who chose love instead of despair. End of story. Dear listeners, we hope that the story of Robert, Isabella, and Julia has deeply touched your heart. If you were moved by this journey of pain, struggle, and rebirth, please leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and tell us in the comments what stood out to you most in this story. Every day, we bring intense narratives like this, which reveal the deepest challenges families face and show that even in the most difficult situations, love and courage can transform destinies. Your presence here motivates us to continue telling stories that matter. We await you in the next episode with a new story that will stir your emotions.